All right, so the election campaign has started here in Germany for the European Parliament elections that will be held across the continent. Now, the date for Germany is June 9th. That is the day Germany will vote. And this will be an election for the members of the European Parliament for each country that is a member of the European Union. Germany has 96 seats up for grabs, and each of the parties in Germany's politics, in Germany's political field and spectrum, will be competing to win the seats that they will send to Brussels for the next 5 years. Now, I want to first take a look at the results of 2019 to see where we are going into this election. And if we take a look there, we can see that this was a very interesting election. The CDU, CSU, and the SPD, as the major parties, suffered historic losses. The Greens and the AFD were able to rise and gain a lot of support. Now, this election was a huge victory for the Greens, which were able to win second place in a nationwide election for the first time, pushing the SPD back to third place for the first time. Now, a lot of this had to do with the focus of environmentalism and climate change on the campaign. The Fridays for Future movement, figures like Greta Thunberg, were very popular at this time, and this fostered an increase of support for the Greens amongst the youth and an increased turnout in the election amongst the youth. And they broke heavily for the Greens, as well as middle-aged and older voters. And the Greens were able to win a 20% of the vote, a doubling of their support from the last election. And this was kind of a trend away from the issues of migration in the European Union, which had allowed the AFD to rise in the years prior. Now, the AFD was still able to win around 3.9, increasing to 11%. This was around where they were at the national elections 2 years before. So they were able to win some support, but not a lot because the campaign focus had shifted to the Greens. Now, this was a victory in a way for the CDU, CSU. This was a terrible result for them. This was a historic low for them. They suffered major losses. However, they still did end up winning the election nonetheless in the end. Now, the SPD cannot be said, had to have the same experience. The SPD lost significant amount of support, 11.5%. This was their worst result in a nationwide election in the Federal Republic's history. Huge losses in East Germany, West Germany, North, South, everywhere across the board, and this was a blow to the party. Now, the Greens were able to kind of assert themselves at this time as the major left-wing party in Germany over the SPD. However, they were not able to hold this momentum as a few years later, in 2021, at the federal elections, Olaf Scholz and the SPD was able to reassert themselves as the dominant left-wing party in Germany. And this is an important discussion we're going to have going into 2024, is whether or not the Greens or the SPD will pull ahead. And there's going to be a battle over the next several years over which of these two parties will be able to claim the throne as the main left-wing party. Now, Die Linke and the BSV will have that discussion over the left itself, but the center-left, the main which party left of center will be able to claim the chancellorship, will be able to lead governments. That will be between the SPD and the Greens, and whichever party will be able to win nationwide elections over the next several years will be able to slowly gain momentum. Now, the SPD is a traditional party. They have existed in German politics for over 100 years, over 150 years. They have a lot of experience. However, the momentum is definitely behind the Greens. A lot of the youth is behind the Greens, as in contrast to the SPD. However, the SPD has been there for a while, and whether or not the Greens are able to overtake them, it's going to take some time, and we will see. Now, the FDP and the Left Party were able to also win around 5% of the vote at this election. And if we take a look at the map, we can see something that you would likely expect. The AFD won heavily in their strongholds in Eastern Germany, the CDU, CSU winning pretty much everywhere rural in the country, especially in the south, in Bavaria, the conservative parts of the country. And then you have these spots of red and green, the green usually being major cities that have large universities, large student populations, and the red having more industrial-based working-class cities. And so we can see the map was pretty much what we would expect. Saxony and Brandenburg, statewide, as a state, went for the AFD, with Berlin, Hamburg, and Schleswig-Holstein going to the Greens. That was a breakthrough for both parties. This was the first time that on a federal election, states went for the Greens. The Greens have been able to win Baden-Württemberg on the state level before, but this was the first time at a federal nationwide election that the Greens were able to win states. The SPD was only able to win the city-state of Bremen, with all other states going to the CDU-CSU. Now, before we get into the results, or the polls rather, for this 2024 election, we need to talk about something that happened recently with the AFD. Now, the AFD has been expected to surge in support since around June of 2023 last year. And what is going to happen is likely that they will increase their support significantly from what they got in 2019, but it will not be, it could potentially not be the large amount we initially expected. Now, there has been a couple of scandals that have developed over the past several days and weeks revolving the AFD and two other candidates on the top of the list. Their two main candidates, Maximilian Krah and Peter Bistron, and it revolves their connections or connections to their offices to China and Russia. Now, the AFD as a political party does have a more neutral stance on a lot of foreign policy issues. They want to have strong relations with Russia and the United States. They want to be neutral in conflicts across the world, and they want to be able to kind of bridge the gap between the West and East. They don't want to be tied to the United States, NATO, and organizations such as that, and they want to increase relations with countries such as China, Russia, even Iran, that they do not see as enemies. They see as more enemies of the United States, and they don't want to get entangled into conflicts because of the United States. Now, of course, the position of the AFD is this is in German national interest. They are doing it to keep Germany out of conflicts. They are doing it to increase peace, stability, and Germany's national security interest. But of course, the political parties that are more aligned to the West say that this is shows that the AFD has connections to anti-democratic, third world countries that are enemies of Germany. And there is, of course, a political nature to these scandals. It is often the case that in elections across the world, that before an election, a scandal will come out a month before. And it is no doubt that, of course, there's no official political connotation or connection to these scandals. It is likely to be assumed that people are using them, releasing this information, allowing it to be released to harm or hurt the AFD in the polls. And that is something that happens pretty much every time, especially during these European parliamentary elections that happened in 2019 as well. So these scandals have definitely hurt the AFD, or at least it appears to have hurt the AFD. The AFD was at around 22% to even 23% in the polling aggregate up until January of this year, and they are now at around 16%. That's around a drop of 6 points in the aggregate. So that is a significant loss in support. Nonetheless, 16% is an increase of 5 from what they got in the last election and 6 from what they got in 2021 in the last federal election. So if they were to win this result, this would be disappointing for them. It would not be the huge increase they were expected initially. However, this would be the best result in the party's history nationwide, and this would be a victory for them. They could still, even with 16%, as we see here, potentially win second place. Now, the question is whether or not they will drop further to 15%. That is possible, but it is also possible they could increase, even maybe reaching 20% in the polls again. The AFD has historically, in some elections, underperformed the polls, but also overperformed the polls. This means a lot of voters could be scared from answering polls, supporting the AFD, but they end up voting for them anyway. So it's hard to kind of tell what they will end up getting in the end. And a lot of this will have to do with how the party responds to these scandals, how they conduct their campaign. There is still a month left in the election, so more things could have come out, but also the party could kind of, pull themselves together and be able to recover some of their support. Now, whether or not these scandals actually have a huge impact on the result is up for debate. Now, we see the BSV here enter at 5.5% in the aggregate. Now, what's important to note is when the BSV was still a hypothetical party in October of 2023, in the polling when they were a hypothetical party in these polls, the AFD was at around 17-18%, meaning that there was around a 4-point loss in the aggregate, 3-4-point loss when we saw the BSV added to the total. Now, what this could mean is that the actual losses the AFD is suffering because of these scandals is only at around 1, maybe 2 points. And the rest of it is due to the fact that the BSV has entered into the federal polling, the European parliamentary polling, since they became an official party a few months ago. Now, we can't really be for sure of either way, but it is possible that these scandals are not having the large effect they seem to be having, and this was kind of inevitable with the rise of the BSV. Now, the SPD and Greens, as we see, are both tied at around 15%, and this is, like I said earlier in the video, this will be an important election to decide which of these parties will become the dominant center-left, force in Germany's political spectrum, and this will be kind of a not identity crisis, but a kind of internal conflict within the center-left, and to determine which of these parties will become a people's party. One of them will become a major party, one of the two parties in Germany. And now we look at the BSV, the FDP, and Die Linke. What's important to note is the European parliamentary elections does not have a 5% threshold, meaning that you do not need to get 5% to win seats. You only need to get enough votes to win one seat, and then you get seats. So instead of a 5% threshold, there's effectively a 0.5% 0.7 around to 0.71% threshold. And so this has some benefits, and this means that parties like the FDP, Die Linke, the Free Voters in Bavaria, even with 3.5%, they were able to win seats in the European Parliament. Now, the BSV won't have to worry about that because they're at 5.5%, so even if there was a threshold, they are likely to clear it. And this will be a good signal for all of these parties because if the BSV is able to get 5.5% here, it is a good sign. It doesn't mean for sure they will be able to repeat that, but it is a good signal that they will be able to do that in the Bundestag elections in 2025 or earlier if they are held. And at the same time, it is a bad sign for the FDP and Die Linke. Now, they will be able to win seats here, but it is show that, if they get 3.5 at this election federally, they are going to struggle to get above 5% at the next federal election, meaning they could potentially lose representation in the Bundestag altogether. Now, if we look at these results as compared to 2019, we can see that the Greens, of course, are suffering some losses. This is, a significant dip in support, but this is not a huge drop in support from what they got in 2021. They are actually increasing by around a point from that result. Now, this is going to be disappointing for the Greens, but this is not a total disaster. For the SPD as well, they're not losing any support, but considering how much they lost in 2019, this is not where they want to be. All three of the major governing parties, the traffic light coalition parties that are together at around 35% of the vote, this is a disappointing result. This is a defeat for them, clearly, but this is not a total disaster. There have been some polls that put all of these parties collectively even like 10 points below it. So this is not the worst result possible for them, but this is nonetheless a very bad sign for these three parties. The CDU-CSU is clearly ahead of the pack, able to, assert themselves as the main largest party in Germany, and even if the AfD is able to rise to maybe 20%, the CDU-CSU has basically no chance of losing. They are going to be the largest party. They've won every previous European parliamentary election. They've never not been first place in an election of this kind, and they will likely be first place again. Now, the results will be in June 9th of 2024, and the next election will be 2029, so this will be for the next 5 years, and this will be a clear signal for what is to come in the next year for the federal election. Of course, the way voters vote in this election compared to the federal election is somewhat different, but it will be important for us to use. And so basically this is going to be the intro video to what is happening in the campaign for the European Parliament election. Of course, we will have much more developments as things go on over the next several months. I will probably do some more videos on the campaigns, on the polls, maybe look at different states and how they voted in previous elections. Talk about the leaders and the main candidates of each party. And of course, I will definitely try to go over some of the results of 2019 and the way it's looking going into 2024 for some other countries, potentially Austria and maybe France. But this is kind of a general overview now that we have started the campaign in Germany of what to expect as things are now. So I hope you all liked and enjoyed this video, and please like, share, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.